Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, August 19th, 2021, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright, guys, well, in this video, we are going to talk about a subject which is near and dear to me, and that is the subject of corn or maize. And the fact that it's a complete mystery to the scientific community. Right now, there's a sort of internal battle going on about what plant it was derived from in the Mexican highlands some 8,000, 9,000 years ago, according to them. Although 80,000-year-old popping corn pollen was found something like 200 feet below ground in Mexico City. So whether it's 8,000 or 9,000 or 80,000 years ago, we're just supposed to believe that, some feller somewhere turned around to his fellows there and said, you know what? I'm going to decide to take this grass over here or whatever and turn it into a superfood. Oh, yeah? What are you going to call it? Corn. Yeah, what is it? What's it look like? Well, I don't know yet because, I have to fiddle with it for a little bit to see what I can do with it. Yeah, you're going to do that with, there's nothing better to do. You're flush with food and no problem. You don't have to work hard that much. No, I can fiddle around with it on the weekends or something like that when, I'm not working on a regular farm. I got plenty of food, yeah, but I'm going to fiddle around with this while all these giant beasts are wandering around, looking to eat my crops and everything. I'm not worried about that at all. I'm just going to, do this for over and over again, and probably my son's sons and their sons' sons, and again, over and over and over for millennia to develop this thing called corn. So, that's what we're supposed to believe, although they can't find the plant really that it was derived from. I've heard tell that the Smithsonian was doing some sort of supposing of their own, thinking that maybe it was derived from some extinct species, possibly, of plant that, just hasn't been identified at all. But, these are the things they have to think about because it's just inexplicable. We know that the corn cobs never fall from the stalks. And even if a stalk falls on the ground, the seeds have to grow out of the husk that's tightly around it, that has to somehow come off. And all the baby plants competing with each other will never reach maturity because they all compete for the same resources. So therefore, when a cob falls to the ground, they know very well, all farmers do, that none of the baby plants can survive because it's too much concentration of plants and competing for the same resources. So it has to be physically done. It has to be physically picked off the stalk and husked and taken off the cob and sown, etc., etc. And we know all kinds of other weird stuff about corn, besides it being like it's the ultimate genetic experimentation model for people. And not only that, a very strange fungus grows on edible fungus grows on corn. That's the ideal scientific research model specimen. So uh, that had to come about, of course, in a short period of time, although it's very rare to find it. The corn smut or the corn truffles or mushrooms that grow on corn, you charge a lot of money to eat it. You can get it in a can if you want. They got it too, these corn truffles, and they're rare and they're worth a lot of money if somebody finds them in their field of corn. But I would imagine only legacy corn, but I don't know. But it is a weird kind of thing going on there. with this parasitic edible fungus that's on it. That's the ideal research specimen. And they do research into breast cancer research and stuff like that with using, DNA from the uh, corn truffles there, or corn smut, as they call it. It's very, very rare. And just another weird thing. And of course, there's the giant Peruvian corn, which, you never saw this. This thing grows like, 14 feet tall and has, huge cobs with giant kernels. And it just so happens that these Peruvian giant corn, there's a girl with some giant corn there, the choclo corn. It's huge with giant kernels, and it just so happens to be, you know, giant megalithic structures with to go along with the giant corn. Here's some nubs in the lentils around these windows here. A couple over here, no window though. They have an extra one or something that they threw in there. And here above this window here, some nubs for no particular reason, or just are they decorative, or you know, whether you believe it's a language or not, it obviously says something. So when you look at nubs or whatever, you would have to know what they are, and if you knew what they were, obviously the people who built the thing did, then you would know what the meaning was. See, it's not that it has no meaning. I don't know what people are trying to say, who trying to say that it doesn't mean anything or what, but it obviously does. And to the people who made all these things, you know, hey, and these ruins here, these Mayan ones, these Rio Beck ruins here, these buildings that look like so incredibly finely built, with the Mayan repair work on it, with the you know mortar and stone work there. Mr. Davis's shop class. They're supposed to be the same people who built this thing of finely cut stone and incredible craftsmanship. Yeah, sure. And the Egyptian ruins, he's a bunch of knobs. This guy calls them pyramid bumps. Pyramid bumps. All these places were stumbled upon by our race, our species of Homo sapiens, our hominid species. But, you know, we all know that there were all these other hominid species living in the past. Well, what about them? They didn't do anything, or they were all savage, or whatever it is. So the thing is that you got the giant corn and giant megalithic ruins, giant and giant, 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 giant. All right, so let's talk about the native languages of the Americas, the Haudenosaunee, Iroquois legends, myths, and stories. And this is the story of corn. And I think you're going to find this story about corn very interesting, especially what they say about the guy who brought the corn. So, and that's the thing about these things. See, the Iroquois aren't the people who originally were in these areas. They migrated from somewhere else, which means that they most likely displaced the people who were there already. I'm just saying that, okay? I'm sure you're not going to find any mainstream academics who are going to say that to you, because that's not a nice, right, thing to say about Native American peoples or whatever. But it seems highly likely that the Iroquois, from wherever they came from, the Ohio Valley, into the areas of New York City where all the stone walls are, and just so happens they have the story of Stonecoat, these stone coats, these bad giants and who are cannibals that live there and everything. But just interesting to me that right next door to them, with the Algonquin peoples, you got all these good giants. So you got all these good giants there with the Algonquin and the Micmac and the other peoples, even the Pequot and the peoples of Long Island, where King Mangatuxi, the giant chief there on Long Island here, where I'm at, right? Have all these good giants just to the east there. But as soon as you get into Iroquois territory, they all turn into stone coats and they're all cannibals and eating everybody. So, I think there's an interesting story there. Stone coats, obviously, it's no such thing, but the stone giants that live there, maybe they had something to do with the walls that were there. And then when the Iroquois got there and displaced them, you know, here's all the stories of those bad old stone coats because you got to get rid of them. They're cannibals and everything else like that. But don't go into Algonquin territory because they like the giants there. In fact, they have a bunch of them that seem to be some hybrids that lived into historical times, whereas the ones that may have been in the Stonewall areas in the interior there or all got disappeared most likely, like the Galena people did. But this is the Iroquois story about corn. Let's read a little bit about what they say about what's going on here. Important Iroquois mythological figures. There is no one consistent body of Iroquois mythology for several reasons. First, the Iroquois were a far ranging people with communities established in such distant locations as Ohio, upstate New York, and North Carolina. Without a written language or even a single shared spoken language, Iroquois folklore in such far flung areas sometimes diverged a lot. Second, after Europeans arrived, the Iroquois people were decimated by disease and warfare, and the traditions of the survivors began to blend together in random ways, obscuring previously consistent tribal differences. And third, the adoption of Christianity began to confound Iroquois traditions, as both Christian Indians and traditionalists began retelling old stories to fit their needs. For these reasons, there is a large amount of variation in the identity and traits of the characters from traditional Iroquois stories. We've included a basic overview here, but please click on each character's name for more detailed information about his or her role in Iroquois mythology. And it's a very interesting page here that you go to and read a lot about. I've been here many times to read stories here and wonder about what actually they're really referring to. But let's read about the story of corn because I'm always interested about who's telling a story of corn. And these are the Mohawks here, even though they were Iroquois language peoples. They're sometimes, I believe, hostile towards the Confederation, to the Haudenosaunee, but still their story is included in with this stuff. So let's read this story here because I think you're going to be interested in just who's bringing corn around and what he looked like and what this whole story might be about. I will talk about that, but let's read the story here because I think you'll find it very interesting. A long time ago, in the time of the beginning, it was told this way: a young boy known as Little Deer was out walking in the forest near his home. Grandfather's sun shone brightly, and the weather was warm. As he walked through the trees, he watched his animal kind relatives. Squirrels ran about, collecting nuts to store for winter. Rabbits chased each other, playing their own kind of tag. A mother deer with twin fawns drank water from a running brook and watched him. She knew that he would not harm her since female deer were not hunted by the people while raising fawns. Little Deer left an offering of sacred tobacco near her, for he was of the Deer clan and wished to learn from her. He watched as she faded into the brush, almost out of sight. He smiled and thought to himself, I must learn to stand so still that even someone nearby would not see me. He listened to the birds as they sounded their voices, singing back and forth to each other through the trees. How beautiful their voices were. He walked farther along. He wished he had a humankind friend near his own age. He often felt lonely. There had been several years of famine among the people. Few children had been born. It was the way of his people to bear children only when there was food enough to nourish the mothers while they carried the gift of new life, and food enough for all. Several children had died of hunger and illness over the long and cold winter. Little Deer longed for a friend and companion. Each morning, when his mother lit the smudge of sweetgrass for opening day, Little Deer prayed to the Great Spirit, Gitche Manitou, and asked him to send a friend and end to the hard times for his people. Little Deer came close to the lake and found a large rock to sit upon. He leaned over the still waters to see his reflection looking back at him. He saw a youth of some 11 winters, whose hair was tied back with a leather thong. It was the custom that men braided their hair only after they married. Then their wives or daughters would comb and braid their hair. As one side was braided, prayers were said for the family members who lived in the physical world. When the second side was braided, prayers were said for those families who had left this world for the world of the spirit. He was dressed in only a softly tanned deerskin wrapped around his waist by a thong of rawhide. He carried a special pouch, also of deerskin, and in it were his sacred objects, one for each of the four kingdoms: plant, animal, human, and mineral. His brown eyes sparkled brightly. He was too young to think yet of marrying. When he did, he knew that he would leave his family to go and live with the family of his wife. That would be many years yet. He looked up into Grandfather's sky. As his eyes rose, an eagle dove down to scoop a fish from the surface of the water, flying off with a screech. That was a good sign. Eagles were always seen as powerful bringers of truth. Little Deer sprinkled tobacco onto the water, giving prayers of thanks to the spirit of the eagle, the waters, and Mother Earth. Lying back on the rock, he closed his eyes. The sun was much warmer now. He grew drowsy and drifted off to sleep. He awoke as a shadow passed over his face, blocking out the warmth of the sun. A stranger's face looked down at him. There were no strangers among the people. Little Deer jumped to his feet with a start, reaching for the obsidian-edged knife he carried at his waist. The stranger spoke, and his voice was kind and gentle. "I will not hurt you, little one. I have come to be your friend. Is that not what your heart wishes for most of all? A friend?" Little Deer looked at him in surprise. "How did you know my name? Where do you come from?" The stranger answered, "I have come from the spirit world in answer to your prayers. You have prayed for a friend, and so I am here." Little Deer laughed. "I would love to have a friend. Why is your hair so strange? I have never seen anyone who looks like you. Your hair is golden like sunlight, and your eyes are the same blue color as the sky." The strange one answered, "Those who live in the spirit world are not the same as you who remain here in this physical one. We come in many colors as there are in the rainbow. Come, let's play a game." So the two played together. They threw rocks across the water to test their strength and aim. They threw them at targets to test their eyesight and accuracy. They ran races to see who could run farthest and fastest. They practiced sitting very still in the forest to watch for the animals who lived there. As Grandfather Sun moved down the horizon, the stranger said, "I must soon return to my home. I will come again in 4 days. Before I go, come and wrestle with me." So Little Deer wrestled with the stranger. Since the older man was much stronger, he soon pinned the boy to the ground. As his shoulders touched the ground, he found himself growing sleepy. His eyes became so heavy he could not stay awake. When next he awoke, Grandmother Moon was just beginning to show her face. Little Deer was not unhappy, for he knew his friend would return. He was very pleased, for the Creator had answered his prayers. He returned through the twilight to his village. For some reason he could not name, he did not tell anyone of his meeting with the stranger in the woods by the lake. On the fourth day, the boy again returned to the lake. As the sun rose, he grew sleepy. As before, when he awoke, the stranger was standing over him. They spent the day playing together. The stranger taught Little Deer many things. He shared stories of the old ones and the and teachings the Creator had given to the people. Little Deer learned much. His favorite teaching was about being in good relationship with all things, all four kingdoms, four directions within oneself, one's family, and community. He came to understand that this meant he must first learn to care for his mind, body, emotions, and spirit. Only when he found this balance could he move forward in a positive way and share with his family and friends. As before, at the end of the day, they wrestled. Little Deer felt stronger. It took the older man a longer time to pin him down. As before, as his shoulders touched Mother Earth, he felt his eyes grow heavy and he fell fast asleep. The stranger was gone when next he woke. Little Deer returned to his village, and as before, he told no one of his day. 4 days following, Little Deer returned to meet his friend. The day passed much as the previous ones had, but the boy noticed that his friend seemed older, more easily fatigued. Little Deer could now throw the rocks as far as his friend. He could easily keep pace with him when they ran races. At the end of the day, it took the older one a very long time to pin him to the earth. As before, when his shoulders touched Mother Earth, he fell asleep, and when he next awoke, the stranger was gone. Little Deer returned to his village. This time, however, he was concerned for his friend. The next 4 days passed very slowly for the youth. At each opening day, he offered prayers to the Creator for his friend. As the morning of the fourth day dawned, Little Deer awoke just as Grandfather's son showed his face to the world. He dressed quickly and quietly left his lodge. He was careful not to awaken anyone, as he did not wish to answer any questions. He hurried through the forest down the trail to where he would meet his friend. Unlike the earlier times when he entered the clearing next to the lake, he found his friend waiting for him. Little Deer hurried the last few steps to his friend, his mouth open in astonishment. The face of the stranger was lined with age. The braids of his long golden hair showed streaks of gray. He stood slightly bent over as the old ones, the elders of Little Deer's people, stood. Little Deer spoke softly to his friend. "My friend, what has happened to you? Are you ill? What can I do to help you?" The stranger smiled wistfully as he sounded his deep voice. Time in the spirit world runs in a different manner than it does in this world of physical things. In that world, I am forever young and strong, but when I visit this one, the body that I put on ages very quickly. Do not worry, little friend. What is, is. Let us spend what time remains together in a good way. The boy felt great sadness in his spirit, but he respected the wishes of his friend and said no more about it. They spent the day together as they had the other ones, playing games of skill, sharing stories, and talking in the way of friends. But now Little Deer was stronger and faster than his friend. He often had to assist the older one in moving about. It seemed that he aged faster with each passing moment. The stranger told the youth stories of the peoples of times now long past. The day passed far too quickly for Little Deer. Soon Grandfather's son began his downward journey. The boy's heart became heavy with sadness. To his eyes, his friend looked older than the oldest person Little Deer had ever seen. The stranger spoke. My little friend, soon this body that I have put on will cease to function. My spirit will return to the spirit world from whence I came. When this happens, I ask you to follow my wishes. Do not be too sad, for I bring you and the people a wonderful gift that will soon end the hunger that brings such pain and sadness. You have shown me a stranger who looks so very different. Kindness. You have been a good friend to me, though my appearance is so different than your own. Your kindness will feed your people for many generations to come. When this body dies, you must dig a hole in the ground. You are to take some fresh fish from the lake and put it into the hole. On top of this, you will place the body I now wear. Then you will put tobacco onto the ground and cover me with the warm, moist soil of our mother, the earth. Next, you will take some sacred cedar, which you will gather in a traditional way in the forest, and sprinkle it over the soil. You will say 4 prayers, one for each of the 4 sacred protectors who live in each of the 4 directions. The cedar and the prayers will guide my spirit on its journey home to the grandfathers and the Creator. Each day you will return to this place and cover the soil with life giving water from the lake. What will grow here will feed the people, their children, and their children's children down to the 7th generation. You are to remember me always, for I come as a special gift, given in love by the Great Spirit, Gitchi Manitou, for the people. My name is Maize. Each year, when harvest time comes in the long days of autumn, you and the people and all who will yet be born will celebrate with feasting and prayers of thanksgiving. Share with all who have the need of this gift. Do this in remembrance of me and my coming. The stranger smiled softly and slowly. Come, little one, wrestle with me. Do not mourn my passing, but honor my memory and my gifts. You will become the keeper of the maize and teach your people how to grow and care for me. I will return again each and every year, and the people will not again know such hunger and pain. So saying, Little Deer wrestled with fair-haired stranger. Tears blurred his eyes. Far too soon the youth pinned the older man to the soil of Mother Earth. As the old one's shoulders touched the ground, his spirit left his body and it ceased to breathe. The heart stopped and the body died. Little Deer said a prayer for the soul of his friend as he began the journey back to the spirit world. Little Deer followed the instructions that his friend had given him, all but one. He mourned for the passing of his friend. He buried the body as he had been instructed in the soil of Mother Earth. Each day he returned to the place and placed water upon the soil. He left tobacco and said prayers for the spirit of his friend. After a few days had passed, plants began to grow. The plants matured and cobs began to grow and mature. Little Deer always seemed to know what needed to be done to care for the plants. It was as though the voice of his friend echoed in his mind and explained what was to be done. Each day he returned to the place and placed water upon the soil. He left tobacco and said prayers for the spirit of his friend. After a few days had passed, plants began to grow. The plants matured, and cobs began to grow and mature. Little Deer always seemed to know what needed to be done to care for the plants. It was though the voice of his friend echoed in his mind and explained what was to be done. As the cobs of maize matured, it pleased the youth to note that the silky tassels that were found on one end of the cobs were the same golden color as his friend's hair had been. Each time Little Deer saw that, he smiled and felt happier. Little Deer shared the gifts of the maize with his village. Soon the people of other villages heard of the wonderful gift and came seeking food. Little Deer honored the wishes of his friend and shared his knowledge with all who asked. Hunger was not again such a problem for the people. Children again were born, and there was food for all. Little Deer soon had many younger friends and companions. As he grew up, he became a leader among his people and was the keeper of the maze for all the years he remained in the world of physical things. His life was long and fulfilled. He never forgot his friend and often told the story to the young ones sitting round the fire in the long cold nights of winter when Mother Earth rested. The story became part of the history of the people, and the storytellers and wisdom keepers passed it down in the oral tradition. So it is today that we honor the gift of Maize and his friend Little Deer. Megwet Skitchy Manitou for the gift of sacred corn. So that's the Mohawk story of how corn came about by this golden hair, blue eyed fellow that liked tests of strength and liked to wrestle and challenge this fellow, Little Deer. Okay. And it's very interesting what he says here. Little Deer always seemed to know what needed to be done to care for the plants. It was as though the voice of his friend echoed in his mind and explained what was to be done. Are you talking about some kind of telepathy? I'm just always so fascinated by telepathy and what they say about Bigfoot and telepathy and having telepathy with UFOs. And what I believe UFOs are. They're creatures that live in space and our atmosphere, and how they're communicate, especially in space, is telepathically, and all this telepathy going on with these people in the past who seem to know their bodies and know their spirit well, unlike us today that doesn't know either one very well. As I've covered on my channel about, can you hear what your body's trying to tell you? And you can't, because of the stupid veil that you got from learning stuff that was inappropriate to learn, and in an order that was inappropriate to learn as well. We talk about that later on, and more like the trivium and quadrivium. But uh, some interesting stuff in here, and the use of these numbers again, and the test of strength. And who is this person? I mean, when they refer to the great peacemaker and talking about him as a big, quote unquote, big man, okay, again, I believe that that the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois people are whatever remnants of the Hope Well there were that were loyal to the Adena, and when they lived in this sort of relationship similar to that of the Watusi people in Africa, and what we've heard about, and also what you can sort of postulate about all these Egyptian renderings and hieroglyphs and whatnot that show these rather large people overseeing much smaller people. I mean, it seems that these relationships between these large hominids and giants and regular sized people like us existed in the past. And despite however they want to try to explain corn, even though the University of California calls it man's single greatest feat of genetic engineering ever, and they can't figure it out. There obviously was some sort of genetic engineering going on in the past with all of these foods. Okay, they sure in some cases you can find wild plants. Now, did the foods come from the wild plants, or the wild plants somehow come from the foods? Okay, it's very interesting. They say recently about corn. I heard some research done on it. I saw some article about how spontaneous mutation occurs in corn, as far as pigmentation at least is concerned, and what the ramifications are for foods. Now, you can get further into the weeds with that, with what their findings show, but you're talking about corn is a very strange and weird plant. It has all these properties that are extremely strange for any sort of plant. And it's this superfood and everything. And I'm sure many tribes have this story of maize, but what was the delay of getting into these people, and how far back in the past does this story really extend from? And for all the peoples in Americas who somehow, were here in the past, but different set of circumstances then followed, right? And prior to, some race of peoples were building these things, all of these things, right? And building these, supposedly Mayan Rio back, which is nonsense. The Mayans didn't do any of this stuff except try to repair these things and then turn them into other things as well, and had nothing to do with the construction of these buildings. 100% positive of it, because of the monster mouth and the serpent mouth buildings that were created from these ultra highly engineered, highly finished, perfectly cut stone temples like this at the Rio Beck site there in Central America. Okay. Just more stuff. All these things were stumbled upon by some peoples later on and then adopted because it was just so frequent in the past that whoever overthrew the previous people just adopted their civilization, or in this case they stumbled upon all these things and they thought about it for a very long time, so it was easy to incorporate it into their myths and legends and culture very easily, not having a specific source of origination. So I just found this story of corn interesting here, and there's also more stories that are equally as interesting about corn here, like the corn spirit, about learning proper respect for corn. And, like I said about the Winnipesaukee, Lake Winnipesaukee stone there, that egg shaped stone with the carvings in it, with the corn in it. Okay. The corn is the power, it's the power of life. Okay. So that's what is said about corn. So the people went on without showing respect for the corn that gave them life. Corn is the power. And you can't grow much corn up there in the mountainous regions, unfortunately. Okay. But the Stonewall area is just another people of upstate and New England and Canada and Pennsylvania and New Jersey are just remnants of some other peoples from the ancient past, and the way that the world went, that the later peoples stumbled upon them, like the Iroquois. But in the Iroquois case, they displaced the people who were already there. This, the story of the Stone Coast is just clear evidence of it. Okay, you have to be suspect of all these things, but right next door with the Algonquin, you have the stories about the good giants. Right, they weren't cannibals and bloodthirsty cannibals and ugly, disgusting, weird people. They were good. Right next door. Okay, so think about those things as well, right? But think about the story of corn here and who delivered it to them. This golden haired, blue eyed fellow, Maize, you know. I don't know where the blue is in the corn except for blue corn, but what are they really saying? Okay, there's so much deep stuff that goes with this stuff. I read to you at the beginning that it's all mixed up with so many retellings and the introduction of Christianity, all this stuff. But what could the actual real story have been from the ancient past there? Another gift from the giants, you know, as well as the little people. If you read the stories from the native peoples, the little people, the natives liked the little people, and the little people liked the natives, and gave them all sorts of knowledge. Here's knowledge being passed down about corn, and you know probably ancient knowledge given to them by the giants. The giants, okay? Giant corn, giants. All right, so just an interesting story there, but many interesting things in it. You could read deeper into it, I think. And there are other native stories which are similar, and this is just a collection of them all and put into one story. But something to think about, and also think about the strangeness of corn. It's a plant that can't survive without our intervention, without our management. It just can't. Okay, and some cavemen some 9,000 years ago, with their asses getting chomped off by dire wolves and saber-toothed tigers and whatnot. They were busy screwing around with weeds and whatnot to see what they could make out of it. We can't do it today with billions of dollars of research centers and all this kind of stuff. All we can do is modify stuff we already got, and corn being one of them is because it's so easy. It's like the simplest one to deal with, but I believe that many other things have been genetically engineered on this planet. And as I said, is what they think is derived from a wild plant is actually some wild plant derived from these superfoods that were created, genetically engineered by somebody in the past, somebody of much larger stature, it seems. Okay, it's a good possibility that that's the way that it was, but certainly the past is far different than what they tell us, and corn is clear evidence of a much more sophisticated, technologically advanced civilization existing in the past. It's just straight up in your face evidence. It's inexplicable, just completely inexplicable, and cavemen didn't make it. We can't make it similar. When we make something similar today, why stop at corn? Let's just make all kinds of superfoods, okay, out of nothing. Take a blade of grass from somewhere outside, take a weed and make it into something, you know, right quick. I mean, waste all your time and effort on that. Isn't there better things to do? Don't we have enough food already? There, all sorts of foods come from the Americas, you know. They had other crops, but corn is an amazing plant. Just an amazing plant. The way it grows, it's just grows so hardy. But any case, guys, think about all these things about corn, about the mythology, about what's going on here, okay? And the big people, the little people, that a completely different past existed. And you think of the remnants of some past previously advanced civilization where genetic engineering things and plants and other things to be useful to them, even, in my opinion, genetically engineering machine type organisms such as biomechanoids. All right. I just on that wavelength. I think I'm all so positive of it because nobody dares talk about any of these things. It's all mainstream. whatever they get out of it, and all the History Channel hype and nonsense and whatnot, you can be sure as you can be that whatever you see on the History Channel about UFOs or anything else is all a bunch of misdirection and, controlled opposition, another rabbit hole for you to go down. It's not telling you the truth. You're not getting a proper picture of the past. You're thinking of all these other crazy things that are not relative. We talk about the evidence on the channel in a most practical way that we can think of it and try to make our way through the past based on the evidence that we have. And so far, none of the things that make millions of dollars and people write books about, we found any evidence of. Okay? It seems to be all homegrown, nothing supernatural or anything involved. Right? That makes for great History Channel shows and a lot of books by these guys who are soaking the masses, the gullible masses, with their cockamamie stories about UFOs and Bigfoot and giants and everything. None of those things have any truth in them at all. Just completely made up nonsense. Okay, we're trying to get to the bottom of these things here based on the scientific findings that we can find out for ourselves. We don't need them. We don't need the Smithsonian to tell us what we can see and hear and read. We can see with our own eyes. Okay, they say the most ridiculous things to avoid trying to explain things that they can't explain. And as long as it can't be explained by them, then it's opened for discussion. I don't care how many sheepskins they got and how many years they've been looking at this stuff, okay? Anybody in the private sector could do the same identical thing without going to any Ivy League university. Anyway, guys, if you like the video, please do hit the like. And if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe because we talk about very many things. If you've been watched my previous videos on the subject of corn and tribal mythology and all of the above, giants and stonework and everything else, then you begin to get a better picture about what this channel is about. All right, guys. Anyway, Bugcat7 signing out. Peace.